My brother slid the workshop key across the lawyer's table, smiled, and said, "Enjoy the dust, Holly. It suits you." It was a flat brass key, dull as an old nickel, and it slid maybe 10 inches across the wood before it stopped against my hand. Across that same table, Trevor had just been handed the deed to a $680,000 house. I got the shed. He thought he'd handed me a joke. He had no idea he'd just pushed me the one thing in Hocking County that could take the house, the loan, and the smile right off his face. My name is Holly Sanders. I was 29 that October, and I had spent every one of those years being the person my family called when something needed fixing and nobody wanted to pay for it. I did not scream. I did not beg. I closed my fingers around the key and I said, "Okay." I keep books for a living. 3 small outfits in Logan, Ohio. A diner, a feed store, and a heating and air man who can drop in a furnace but cannot add a column of numbers without help. I reconcile ledgers to the penny, and I find the penny. That is most of my talent and a fair bit of my personality. I don't raise my voice. I reconcile. So when Trevor grinned and the room went warm with everyone's relief that I'd taken it so well, I was already doing the only thing I know how to do. I was counting. The lawyer was Howard Linley, who had handled my grandfather's papers for 30 years and had the decency to look uncomfortable. His office sat above the hardware store on Main, 2 flights up, with a window that rattled when the coal trucks went by. He read the division like a man reading a forecast he hadn't written. The house up on Maple Grove to Trevor, the contents of that home to my parents, Dale and Carol Sanders, who already lived in it. And to me, the workshop and outbuilding at the end of Spring Street, with all tools and contents therein. All tools and contents therein. 50 years of my grandfather's working life, folded into one clause and handed over like the chore nobody else would touch. My mother reached across and patted Trevor's arm. "It's only right," Carol said. "Trevor has a family to think about. Holly's always been so independent." Independent. That was the word they had for it. For 29 years, I'd been independent the way a load-bearing wall is independent. Nobody thanks the wall. They just lean on it and complain about the paint. My grandfather had been gone 8 months by then. Walt Sanders died in February, quiet, in the back bedroom on Maple Grove, with my mother bringing him soup she reminded everyone about for weeks afterward. He was the only one of them who ever sat with me without wanting something. He taught me to true a board and balance a checkbook in the same afternoon, and he never once called me independent. He called me girl like it was a name, and from him it nearly was. The shop was his. He built furniture in it for half a century, hard maple and black walnut, pieces that are still standing in half the kitchens in this town. And once, maybe 2 years before he passed, he caught my hand on the porch and pressed that same brass key into it and folded my fingers shut over it. "You hold on to this," he said. "Not your dad, not your brother, you." I laughed and asked what was so precious in a shed full of sawdust. He didn't laugh back. He held my eyes one beat too long and said, "The best things in that shop are behind the walls, girl. You remember that." I thought he was being sentimental. Old men get that way about their tools. I dropped the key in a kitchen drawer and forgot the whole thing for 2 years. Back in that office, the key sat warm in my fist, and I did not think about the porch. Not yet. I was watching Trevor. Linley slid a second set of papers toward me, and my brother leaned in before the lawyer could open his mouth. He'd dressed up for this, a collared shirt I'd never seen on him, and he had the bright, busy energy of a man with somewhere better to be. "It's just a quitclaim haul," he said. "Standard stuff. You sign off your interest, everybody's clean, we close it out. Can you get it back to Howard by Friday?" "Friday," I said. "Bank thing. You know how it is. Easier on everybody if it's wrapped up before the weekend. He smiled wider. You're the one who's good at paperwork. This one's easy. I didn't know yet what Friday meant to him. I'd like to tell you I felt it coming. I didn't. I just thought my brother was in a hurry, which was the most ordinary thing about him. Linley cleared his throat. No rush from my end, Holly, he said. Take your time. Read it through. And he held my eye one beat past polite, the way a man does when he's saying more than the room allows. I noticed. I filed it away with the rest. I left before my mother could organize a lunch about it. Down the 2 flights, out past the hardware store, onto Main, where the maples had gone the color of rust and the whole town smelled like wood smoke and the cider place 3 doors down. The diner is on the corner, the Hocking House Grill, though nobody calls it anything but the diner. I keep their books. I wasn't even on the clock. I went in for coffee because my hands wanted something to hold that wasn't that key, and Donna behind the counter had the till tape stretched out, scowling at it like it owed her money. Off again? I asked. $4 over. Been through it twice. I turned the tape toward me. Took about 40 seconds. A breakfast special rung up twice, and a void that never voided. $4. On the nose. I marked it with the pencil from behind her ear and slid it back across. There, I said. You double-charged the Hendersons and refunded yourself the difference. Donna laughed. Holly Sanders. What would this town do without you? I didn't tell her my own family had just measured my whole inheritance with their eyes and handed me the shed out back. Some things you keep behind your teeth. I drank my coffee black and let the warmth do what family wouldn't, and the key sat in my coat pocket the whole time, like a hot coal I couldn't put down. Here is what my life looked like that fall, in case you've got me pegged as the kind of woman things just happen to. I rented the top half of a house on Mulberry. I kept other people's money straight until my eyes burned, and I was good at it, and it paid enough and not $1 more. I drove a truck with 190,000 miles on the clock. I did not have a family to think about. The way my mother kept reminding the room, and the way she said it, you'd think that was a thing I'd failed at instead of a thing nobody had ever offered me. Trevor had the family, 2 kids, a wife named Megan, and a custom truck shop over in Nelsonville that he talked about like it was already on a billboard. He had wanted the Maple Grove house for years. Before Grandpa was a week in the ground, my brother was walking those rooms with a tape measure, talking about opening up the kitchen and what these places go for now. A flip, or a flip he'd live in. Either way, the shed and I were just in the way of it. 2 days later, my mother called, not to ask how I was sitting with everything, to set a deadline. We're going to need that shop cleared out by the end of the month, Carol said. Trevor's found a buyer who wants the whole Spring Street lot, and that shed is an eyesore. Take whatever tools you want and we'll have somebody haul the rest off. The end of the month is 11 days, I said. Then you'd best get started, Holly. And don't forget to sign Howard's papers. Trevor needs that done before Friday. There it was again. Friday, like a nail somebody kept tapping. Why Friday? I asked. A small pause. The kind I've learned to hear in a phone line the way I hear it in a ledger, the half-second where the number stops matching the story. Don't make this difficult, she said, and hung up. I should have driven straight to the shop. Instead, I drove up to Maple Grove because there was a thing of Grandpa's I wanted before strangers boxed it. A pair of reading glasses he kept on the kitchen sill, the cheap drugstore kind he bought by the 3-pack. I had a key to that house my whole life. It didn't turn. New deadbolt, bright brass, the sticker still gummed to it. A lockbox hung off the door handle like a tumor. Through the front window, I could see boxes stacked in the hall and a paint deck fanned out on the counter, where my grandfather used to roll out pie dough on Sundays. Trevor's truck swung into the drive behind me before I made it back down the steps. He didn't get out, just dropped the window. Forget something? He said. Grandpa's glasses, off the sill. Place is staged now, Hall. Can't have people pawing through it. He said it easy, almost kind, the way you'd talk a dog off the couch. Everything in there's spoken for. You got the shop? Stick to the shop. You changed the locks. I changed the locks. He smiled, and for 1 second I saw exactly how this was going to go for the rest of my life if I let it. Every door in the family quietly fitted with a bolt I didn't have the key to. Sign the quitclaim, would you? Before Friday. Then we're square. Square. I almost laughed. I didn't. I got in my truck and I backed out of the drive of the house my grandfather died in, and I did not let him see my face do anything at all. I drove to Spring Street instead. To the dead end, past the old Sanders place with its windows gone dark, back to where the shop sat low and gray under a black walnut tree, the gutters sagging, one window patched with cardboard. An eyesore. My mother was right about that much. I sat in the truck a while as the light went out of the sky. Then I took the brass key out of my coat pocket and I walked up through the wet leaves and I fitted into the padlock on that warped old door for the first time as the woman who owned it. The key turned like it had been waiting. The door stuck against the frame, swollen with 30 autumns. And then it gave all at once, and the smell came out at me in the dark. Linseed oil and cut walnut and cold iron. The smell of him. I stood on the threshold with my grandfather's voice somewhere far back in my head, telling me about the best things and the things behind the walls, and I reached in and found the light. The light was a single bulb on a pull chain over the bench, and when it caught, it buzzed and threw my shadow long across the floor, all the way to the back wall. I stood on the threshold and let my eyes find the shape of the room, and the room came back to me, one piece at a time. It was exactly as he'd left it. That was the thing that reached me first, before grief or anything with a name. 8 months gone, and nobody had moved so much as a clamp, because nobody had ever wanted to be in here. The bench ran the length of the right-hand wall, scarred and oil-dark. The big iron vise bolted to the near corner where I used to sit on a stool and watch his hands work. Above it hung the pegboard, every tool in its place with its outline painted behind it in white, so he could tell at one glance what had wandered off. A chisel missing from its shape was the only mess Walt Sanders ever allowed. Saws graded by length. Clamps hung in a row like black birds on a wire. His shop apron still drooped on its nail by the door. The canvas gone soft as bedsheet from half a century of his hands wiping themselves down it. The smell came up around me. Linseed and cut walnut and cold iron, and under all of it the thin sweetness of the cedar he kept for drawer bottoms. A coffee can of pencils sat on the bench, every point sharpened. A transistor radio with a coat hanger for an antenna, a jar of pennies he used to weigh down glue-ups while they dried, and a lumberyard calendar from over in Lancaster still turned to February, the month he passed, as if the whole room had quit breathing the same week he did. I did not cry. I am not put together that way, or I am put together too far on the other side of it. What I did was start to count. It was reflex. I keep books. Drop me in a room and my eyes go around it making columns. This is here. That is there. This many of those. I walked the length of the bench and my hands started squaring the small things without my telling them to. The way another person might straighten a picture on a stranger's wall. I lined up the pencils. I set the jar of pennies square to the edge. I picked his apron off the nail and held it a second and put it back, because some things are not mine to tidy. My mother wanted this place empty in 11 days, so a stranger could buy the dirt it stood on. Trevor wanted it gone because it sat between him and the number he had in his head. And I stood in the middle of it that first night with no plan in the world except that I could not make my hands stop ordering my grandfather's life into rows. My phone went off in my coat. I already knew before I looked. Trevor. Hey, did Howard get the quitclaim back yet? Needs to be done before Friday. Don't sit on it, Hall. I looked at it a while in the yellow light. Then I put the phone back in my pocket and did not answer, because I had nothing to reconcile it against yet. A number you cannot explain, you do not pay. You hold it, and you wait, and you find the other side of it. That is the whole job. I worked until past midnight that first night, and I drove home to Mulberry Street with sawdust in the cuffs of my jacket and slept better than I had since the lawyer's office. I went back the next night, and the night after. I told myself I was clearing it out the way they'd asked. That was a lie I let myself keep for about an hour at a time. What I was actually doing was reading him. The shop was a ledger 50 years deep, and I went through it line by line. I found order slips spiked on a nail by the door, written in his blunt pencil hand, a corner cupboard for the Reaches, a blanket chest for a wedding in 1986, paid in full, everyone. I found a drawer of his patterns cut from cereal box card, soft at the folds. I found a cigar box of brass screws sorted by length into matchboxes, and I sat on the cold floor and sorted the few that had spilled, because he would have hated them loose. And on the second night, I found the coffee tin. It was up on the shelf over the lathe, an old blue can, the paper label long gone, heavier than it should have been. I took it down and worked the lid, and it was full of paper, folded checks and bank slips packed in tight. I tipped a few into my palm. They were canceled checks, the old kind, and the handwriting on the top one stopped my hand for a second, because it was my mother's. Carol Sanders, her careful, slanted hand, made out to Walt Sanders. There was a word written on the line down in the corner where you note what a check is for. I did not read it close that night. I want to tell you I understood right then, and I did not. I was tired and my eyes were full of his patterns and his screws, and a tin of old checks between a father and his grown daughter is the most ordinary thing in the world. I pressed the lid back on and set it on the bench by the vise, square to the edge, and I told myself I'd go through it proper when my head was clearer. It sat there the rest of the week like something patient. I would come back to that tin. So would everyone else, in the end. But not yet. What pulled at me instead was the wall. I want to explain how I found it because it was not a feeling, and it was not my grandfather's ghost. It was arithmetic. On the third night, I brought his long steel tape from the pegboard, the one with his initials scratched into the case, because I'd decided to do this like an inventory, wall by wall, so I could tell the stranger's holler exactly what was here. I measured the bench wall. I measured the door wall. And when I stood at the back of the shop and ran the tape along the inside of that rear wall, then walked outside into the wet leaves and the cold, and ran it along the outside, the two numbers did not agree. The outside of that building was longer than the inside by about 1.5 feet. I stood in the dark behind the shop with the tape in my hand and read the case twice to be sure I hadn't misjudged his marks. I had not. A building does not lose 1.5 feet between its skin and its bones. Walls are not that thick. A number that will not match the story behind it is the only thing on this earth I am truly good at noticing, and this one was screaming. I went back inside and really looked at that rear wall for the first time. I'd walked past it 3 nights running. It was paneled in the same rough boards as the rest of the shop, gray and old, and at a glance it belonged. But the boards on the back wall ran a shade newer than the others. The nail heads sat proud where everywhere else they were sunk and painted, and the whole wall was furred out from the framing, built forward, stealing that foot and a half from the room and giving it to a space behind that no door opened onto. I put my hand flat on the boards. I thought about an old man on a porch folding my fingers shut over a dull brass key. The best things in that shop are behind the walls, girl. You remember that. I had remembered it. I had just thought it was a saying. I don't raise my voice. I reconcile. So I did not stand there marveling. I went to the pegboard and took down the flat pry bar from its painted outline, and I came back to the wall, and I set the claw under the edge of the newest board, and I leaned into it. The nails gave with a long, dry shriek, the sound a house makes when you take part of it apart. The board came free, and I set it down soft against the bench and looked into the dark behind it, into a gap maybe 18 inches deep, walled off and dry, that no one alive but me had any idea was there. I took the bulb off its hook and held it up. There was a shelf back there, one plain board nailed across the studs at chest height, set in so true it could only have been his. And on the shelf, pushed to the back where the boards had hidden it, sat a bundle wrapped in oilcloth and tied with a length of waxed string, the kind he used for everything, the kind that was looped around 40 other things in that shop. I worked it off the shelf with both hands. It was heavier than it looked, the way the coffee tin had been, the weight of paper that has been kept on purpose. The string had gone stiff. I didn't fight the knot. I slid the loop off the end and let the oilcloth fall open across the bench in the light, and the smell of it came up, old paper and machine oil and the faint green ghost of the cloth. There were 3 ledgers, bound in black cloth, the corners worn pale. There were bundles of receipts banded in rubber gone to powder, and folded on top, by itself, was a single document on the heavy cream paper that legal things used to be printed on, soft along its creases from being folded a long time. I opened it under the bulb. It was a deed, a warranty deed, recorded, the county stamp pressed blue in the corner with a date and a book and page number printed beside it. I read the legal description and the lot and the survey lines, and I read the road, and the road was Maple Grove. It was the deed to the big house, the house with the new brass deadbolt and the lockbox hanging off the handle like a tumor. The house my brother had been handed across a lawyer's table and had already started measuring for a flip. And the name on it, the owner of record, the name that held that house in law and on paper, and in the basement of the county building 2 doors from the courthouse, was not Trevor Sanders. It was not Dale and Carol Sanders. It was Walt Sanders, in trust, and there was a second sheet stapled behind it with the word trust at the head of it and his signature at the foot. Tucked between the deed and the top ledger was a slip of his paper, folded once. I knew the hand before I unfolded it, blunt pencil, all capitals where it mattered. You were the only one who ever balanced the books with me. Look behind the wall, girl. I sat down on the cold concrete with my back against the bench, and the deed open in my lap and his note in my hand, and the single bulb swinging a little overhead from where I'd held it, sending my shadow rocking on the wall I'd just torn open. I did not feel triumphant. I'll be straight about that much and no more. I felt the floor of everything I'd been told my whole life tip a few degrees, the way a column does right before you find the error that's been throwing the whole page off for years. Because if my grandfather had held that house in his own trust until the day he died, then my parents had never owned it. They had lived in it. And if they had never owned it, they had never had a thing to leave to Trevor, and Trevor had been handed a deed to a house that, by every line on the cream paper in my lap, was not theirs to give. I thought about the coffee tin sitting up on the bench, square to the edge where I'd left it, full of my mother's careful hand writing checks to her own father. I thought about the word in the corner of the top one that I'd been too tired to read. Then I did the only thing I know how to do when a number finally finds its other half. I got up off the floor. I took out my phone and I started photographing every page. The deed first, both sides, the stamp, the book and page, then the trust, then the first ledger spread open under the light, one frame at a time, square and flat and in focus, the way you keep a record that has to hold up later in a room full of people who will not want to believe it. My phone buzzed in my hand between photographs. Trevor again. Whole. Friday. I mean it. This is time sensitive on my end, time sensitive on his end. I looked at that for a moment. The bulb still swinging, the open wall breathing cold behind me, the deed with my grandfather's name on it lying in the light where my brother could not see it and did not know to fear it. I went back to photographing the ledgers. I would find out soon enough what Friday was so afraid of. The first ledger went back to 1971, and I read it on the floor with my back against the bench, because once I had it open, I could not make myself stand up. It was him entire, job by job, year by year, in the blunt pencil that turned to ink dark where he pressed. A walnut sideboard for a family named Etherton, materials and hours and the price he charged, which was always less than the work was worth. A church pew repair, a run of kitchen cabinets that took him most of the winter of 1979. Every line carried out and totaled and every page balanced, and where a customer had paid him slow, he had noted it without heat, just the date the money finally came and a small check mark, the same check mark I make, the one that means this is closed. You can stop watching it now. I turned to the back of the third ledger because that is where a careful man keeps the thing he wants found last. And there it was, a section he had ruled off himself with a straight edge and titled in capitals across the top of the page. Maple Grove. Underneath it ran 2 columns, and I understood them before I had read 3 lines, the way you understand a face. He had bought the house on Maple Grove in 1994. The price was there, and the closing date, and the name of the title company over in Lancaster. And then, a year on, an entry that put a cold hand flat on the back of my neck. He had moved the house into a trust, Walt Sanders Revocable Living Trust, the date, the lawyer, and under it a single sentence in his own hand, not legal language, his. Dale and Carol to live here and keep it up. Not theirs. Mine, then Holly's. I read that line maybe 6 times. Mine, then Holly's. Not Trevor's. Not the both of us split down the middle the way a fair man might do it. He had skipped a generation and skipped his own grandson and put it down on the line for me. The way you write a number you have already checked twice and do not intend to change. And below that, the second column, every month since 1995, a figure, $400, then later 5. Beside each one a notation, from Dale and Carol, upkeep, from Dale and Carol, upkeep, year after year after year, down the page and on to the next, my parents paying my grandfather to live in the house they told the whole of Hocking County they owned. That is when I got up and went for the coffee tin. It was still on the bench where I had set it square to the edge, patient as a dropped stitch. I worked the lid and tipped the whole of it out into the light this time, and I sorted as I went, because I cannot do it any other way. Cancelled checks, decades of them. My mother's careful slanted hand and my father's worse one. Carol Sanders, pay to the order of Walt Sanders, $400. And down in the corner of every single one, on the little line they print there for you to say what the money is for, the same word, rent. She had written it herself. Rent, rent, rent. A whole tin of her own handwriting, 30 years of it, swearing under her own pen that she did not own the house she had just handed my brother across Howard Linley's table like it had been hers to give since the start of time. I sat with the checks fanned out across the bench under the buzzing bulb and I did the arithmetic, because that is the only prayer I know. 300 and some checks at 4 and 500 a month. They had paid my grandfather better than $150,000 over the years to be the caretakers of a house that was never coming to them. And not one of them had ever once written the word that would have made it theirs, because there was no such word to write. You cannot buy a thing with rent. Rent is the opposite of owning. Rent is the proof you never did. I did not feel anything I could have named to you. I felt the way I feel at 11 at night, when the trial balance finally ties out and the difference goes to zero. That flat, clean drop in the chest when a thing that has been wrong for a long while quietly becomes right. I gathered the checks back into the tin in order, by year, oldest at the bottom, and I pressed the lid on, and I put it in my bag instead of back on the shelf. It was evidence now. It had always been evidence. It had just been waiting on someone who kept books to walk in and read it. The deed I had photographed front and back. The trust I had photographed. The ledgers I shot page by page on the bench, flat and square and in focus, and I backed every frame up twice before I drove home to Mulberry Street that night. Because a thing this size you do not trust to one phone. Tuesday morning, I drove down to the county recorder's office, which sits 2 doors from the courthouse on the square in the middle of Logan, in the brick block with the worn stone steps. I had been past it 1,000 times and never once inside. A woman named Brenda worked the counter, reading glasses on a beaded chain, and when I told her what I wanted, she pointed me to the public terminal in the corner, like I had asked her where the restroom was, because to her it was nothing. It was Tuesday. I pulled the parcel for the Maple Grove house, and I read the chain of it the way you read a bank statement looking for the charge you did not make. And the chain told the same story the ledger told, only this time with the county's blue stamp on it, which is the only kind of telling that matters in the end. The house went into the Walt Sanders Revocable Living Trust in 1995, recorded, book and page, stamped. And then nothing. For 26 years, nothing. The trust held it, quiet, unbroken, all the way to a date 8 months back that I did not have to look up because I had stood at that grave in the cold. After that, 2 new instruments, both recorded inside the last 90 days. The first was a deed. From the estate of Dale and Carol Sanders, it read, conveying the Maple Grove property to Trevor Sanders. Signed, notarized, recorded, clean as anything. If you did not happen to know that the people doing the conveying had never owned the thing they were conveying, you cannot hand down a house that was only ever lent to you. The deed was real ink on real paper at the county, and underneath it there was nothing holding it up. The way a number can foot perfectly across and still be wrong because the figure it started from was a lie. And the second instrument is the one that made me sit very still on that hard county chair. It was a mortgage. A second mortgage against the Maple Grove house, recorded 3 weeks after the deed to Trevor, in Trevor's name, in favor of a bank 2 counties over. The figure was printed right there in the recorded instrument the way figures are. $310,000. I knew about the truck shop. Everyone in the family knew about the truck shop, Trevor's custom rig outfit over in the next town. The one he was always 2 months from turning the corner on. The one that ate money the way the lathe ate cedar. I had heard my mother call it an investment in that bright, tight voice she used when a thing was going badly. I had not known he had reached for the house to feed it. I knew now. He had taken my grandfather's house, the house that was never his, The house, the county said, in 3 separate stamped places belonged to a dead man's trust, and then to me. And he had borrowed $310,000 against it to keep a failing shop breathing. I want to walk you carefully through what I understood sitting in that chair, because it is the hinge the whole thing turns on. Trevor had signed papers swearing to a bank that he owned the Maple Grove house free to pledge it. He did not own it. He had never owned it. The deed that gave it to him gave him nothing, because the people who signed it had nothing to give, which meant the $310,000 he had already spent was secured against a house that was not his. On the word of an owner, he was not. He had not committed a mistake. A mistake is a transposed digit. He had put his name to a loan on collateral he did not hold. And the moment anyone with the deed in their hand said so out loud in the right room, his whole arrangement turned into something with a much worse name than mistake. He did not know it yet. That was the strange and terrible part of sitting there. Trevor was somewhere across the county that Tuesday morning, drinking gas station coffee, sending me texts about Friday. Certain he was about to win. Certain the only loose thread in his life was a quiet sister, who had not yet signed away a falling down workshop on Spring Street. He thought he was waiting on me. He was waiting on a wall I had already torn open. I paid Brenda for certified copies of all 3, the trust deed, the estate deed to Trevor, and the mortgage, and she stamped them and slid them across the worn counter and told me to have a good one, hun. I drove the certified copies straight to Howard Linley's office on the far side of the square. Howard had done my grandfather's legal work for 40 years, and my parents after, and he had sat at the head of that table the day the key came across it at me. He was old now, hands spotted, but the eyes behind the glasses had not gone anywhere. I laid the certified copies on his desk one at a time, the way you lay down cards you are sure of, and I said almost nothing because I have learned that a number speaks better than I do. I let him read. He read the trust deed. He read the estate deed to Trevor. He took his glasses off when he got to the mortgage, which I have come to understand is the thing lawyers do instead of swearing. He sat back and he looked at me for a long moment over the paper. "Holly," he said, "do your folks know the house was in Walt's trust?" "I don't think anybody knew but Walt," I said. "And now me." He tapped the trust deed with one finger. "This is recorded. This is good. This held title the day Walt passed." He moved his finger to the estate deed. "And this conveyed nothing because Dale and Carol were never more than life tenants. Their interest ended when they did. There was nothing in the estate to deed." He did not raise his voice either. "We are the same kind of people, Howard and I. Under the trust, on Walt's death, this property passes to you. Outright." "I read it that way too," I said. "I wanted to hear someone who went to law school say it." He looked at the mortgage a long time. Then he set it down on top of the other 2, square, lining the edges up without seeming to know he was doing it. "Your brother," he said slowly, "has borrowed $310,000 against a house he does not own. The bank thinks it has a lien on Maple Grove. It has a lien on nothing." He took a breath. "This is going to come apart, Holly. When it comes apart, it is going to come apart on him, and it is going to be loud, and it is not going to be kind. I have to ask you what you want to do, because you are the one holding the deed." I thought about my brother sliding the key across this man's table 8 months of grief ago. "Enjoy the dust, Holly. It suits you." "I don't want to do anything to him," I said, and I meant it, which I think surprised us both. I've been doing things for them my whole life, covering the difference, making it balance when it didn't. I'm done doing things. I put my hand flat on the stack of certified copies. I just want it on the table, all of it, once, in front of everybody, and then I want to stop holding it up. Howard Linley looked at me for a while. Then he nodded, slow, like a man agreeing to something heavier than the words. Then we put it on the table, he said. The text came in from Trevor while I was still in Howard's parking lot, sitting in my car with the certified copies on the passenger seat. He had given up on Friday and gone for the whole thing. Family meeting Sunday, Maple Grove, 2 p.m., Mom and Dad, too. We need this workshop thing done whole. Bring the signed quitclaim. The bank needs everything clean by EOD Monday. Don't make this weird. The bank needs everything clean by Monday. He had told me the deadline himself, finally, without knowing he had told me anything at all. Clean title by Monday, or the loan he had already spent went bad under him. He thought I was the last dirty corner of it. He thought I was a signature he had not collected yet. I read it twice. Then I texted back the only word I had given any of them since the day the key came across the table. Okay, I'll be there. I set the phone face down on the certified copies, and I drove back out to Spring Street, to the shop, to the open wall and the swinging bulb and the smell of him, because I had 2 days, and there was one more thing in those ledgers I wanted to have by heart before I walked into that house on Maple Grove on Sunday and let my grandfather speak for himself. The last page of the last ledger was not a page of figures, and that is why I had skipped it the first night, because a column of numbers that simply stops is a thing my eye slides off of. But the writing kept going past where the numbers quit. Smaller now, the pencil pressed lighter the way a hand presses when it is tired. And the date at the top was 3 weeks before the cold morning. My father called the apartment on Mulberry Street to say that Walt was gone. Below the last job he ever booked, a run of cabinets for a family out on Front Street that he had priced too low the way he priced everything, he had stopped keeping accounts and started keeping me. Holly, it began, they will tell you the shop is the small thing and the house is the big one. They have had it backwards their whole lives. I have put what matters where a person has to read all the way down to the bottom of the page to find it, which is the same as putting it where only you would go. Your father signs papers he has not read. Your brother measures rooms before they are his. Let them. A man cannot lose a thing he was only ever borrowing, and they have been borrowing the ground under that house since the spring I handed them the key and let them call it home. Keep the books, girl. They balance. They have always balanced. I read it sitting on the floor with my back against the bench and the one bulb turning slow over my head, and what came up in me was not triumph, and it was not grief. It was recognition, that plain click a column makes when it finally agrees with itself. He had not left me the dust because the dust was what was left over for the quiet one, after the good things were spoken for. He had left me the dust because dust is what you lay over a thing you do not want the wrong people to dig for. For 8 months, I had carried it as the leftover. It had been the vault the whole time, and the people who took the house had been handed nothing but the lid. I wrapped the ledger back into the oilcloth, and I went home, and I did not sleep much, and that was all right. Sunday was 2 days out. Maple Grove on a Sunday afternoon in October is the prettiest street in Logan, and the house has always known it. Brick the color of a good loaf. The maples Walt's father set out a lifetime ago going gold over the roofline. Trevor's truck sat slantways in the drive, the one with the shop's name down the side. The shop 2 towns over that ate money the way the lathe ate cedar. My parents' sedan was parked square behind it. I left my car on the street because I no longer had a key to anything up there, and because a person who has come to set a thing down does not need to pull all the way in. I had the folder under my arm and the coffee tin in my bag, and I had Howard Linley about 2 minutes behind me in his old Buick, because I had asked him to come, and he had told me he would not miss it for the world. Trevor opened the door before I could knock, already grinning, already loose and large in the doorframe of the house he believed was his. There was a pen tucked behind his ear. He had set the kitchen table up like an office. A single sheet turned to face the chair he meant me to take. The quitclaim, the pen's twin laid beside it, ready. My mother stood at the counter with her hands folded into each other. My father sat at the head of the table, in the chair where Walt used to sit, and he did not look up at me. "There she is," Trevor said. "On time for once. Sit down, Hall. This is 5 minutes, and then nobody has to think about that woodpile on Spring Street ever again." He pulled the chair out for me, a thing he had not done once in 33 years. "Coffee?" "Mom made coffee. Sign the shop over, bank clears it all Monday, clean and gone." I did not sit. I set my folder on the table beside his single sheet, square to the edge, and I said, "I brought Howard." Something moved across his face and then went smooth. Howard Linley was the family lawyer. Howard had done the will. To Trevor, in that half second, a lawyer at the table meant the paperwork would come out ironclad, meant the thing he wanted made faster and harder to ever undo, and he almost looked grateful for it. "Good," he said. "Yeah, good. Let's get it notarized right. I don't want loose ends on this one." "Neither do I said. Howard came in without knocking, the way a man does in a house he has walked into for 40 years, and he set his case on the table and did not open it straight away. He said hello to Carol. He said Dale. He gave Trevor the nod you give Weather. Then he drew out 3 pages with the county's blue stamp across them and laid them down. 1 and 2 and 3, and put his reading glasses on. "Before anyone signs anything," Howard said, "I'm going to read one line out loud. Then we can talk." Trevor's grin had gone fixed at the corners. "Read whatever you like. It's the same house it was yesterday." "It is," Howard said. "That is rather the whole of the matter." He slid the top page toward himself. The recorded trust deed. Book 612, page 140. He read it in the flat, unhurried voice of a man who has read 1,000 of these and never once needed to lift it. "Upon the death of the grantor, Walt Sanders, the trustee shall convey the premises at Maple Grove, free and clear, to Holly Sanders. During the grantor's life, Dale Sanders and Carol Sanders may reside upon the property as caretakers." The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed against the wall. Howard set the page flat. "Walt did not give your parents this house," he said to Trevor, "not unkindly. He let them live in it while he was alive, and he asked them to keep it up, and he wrote down who it went to the day he died. It went to Holly. Your parents never held the ownership of it, which means the deed your father signed across to you this spring handed you precisely what they had to hand, which was nothing at all." Trevor laughed, the short, ugly bark he uses when a customer tells him the truck is not ready. "No, Dad. Dad, tell him. We did it at the office. I have the deed. It's recorded. I've got the copy out in the truck right now." "You do," Howard agreed. "It is recorded. A recorded deed from someone who does not own the thing is still only a recorded deed. The county will stamp whatever you carry into them. The stamp doesn't make it so." The trust came first, son, by 26 years. My mother had not moved from the counter, but her hands had come apart. Walt said she started, and the rest of it left her. He told us we'd always have a place here. He said, "Stay as long as you want." "As long as you lived," Howard said, gentle as he could make it. Which was true. You only ever heard the half of it you wanted to keep. I reached into my bag then and I took out the coffee tin, the same dented red tin that had sat on Walt's bench under the swinging bulb, patient as a dropped stitch, and I set it in the middle of the table between Trevor's quitclaim and Howard's deed. I did not make a speech. I worked the lid off and I turned it over and I let them fall. 30 years of canceled checks fanning out across the wood, the way a deck fans, my mother's slanted hand on every single one of them. Pick any of them up, I said. It was the first whole sentence I had spoken since I came through the door. Trevor snatched one. Carol did not need to. She knew her own writing from across her own kitchen. He read it, and I watched his eyes find the little printed line at the bottom, the one where the bank asks you to say what the money was for, and I watched him read the word my mother had put down there better than 400 times. Rent. Pay to the order of Walt Sanders. Rent. Rent. You paid him, Trevor said, and he was not saying it to me. He had turned to his father. You paid Grandpa to live here. Every month. For 30 years. You paid him rent. It was just how he wanted it done, my father said, and it was the first thing he had said, and it came out of him about the size of a coin. You can't pay rent on a thing you own. Trevor's voice climbed and then split, because he was never a stupid man, only a wanting one, and the arithmetic had finally walked all the way up to him the way it had walked up to me on the shop floor. You cannot buy a house with rent. Rent is the receipt that proves, in your own hand, that you never once bought it. He stood so fast, the chair went over backward onto the floor. No, he said. No, this is the bank already, you don't. He stopped himself, but the front edge of it was already out in the room, and my mother caught it. The bank already what, Trevor? She said. He didn't answer her. So Howard answered, because Howard had read the third stamped page, and he laid it now in the center of the table next to the spilled tin. 3 weeks after your son took a title he does not hold, Howard said. He borrowed $310,000 against this house from a bank over in the next county. That instrument is recorded as well. That is the deadline, Carol. Not the workshop on Spring Street. This. I have never watched the color leave a person the way it left my mother then. She looked down at the recorded mortgage, and then she looked up at her son, and the house on Maple Grove that she had handed him like a crown 3 months back turned, right there in front of her face, into a debt he had pledged against a thing that had never been his to pledge. That's what this was, she said, slow. That's why it had to be this weekend. Trevor was breathing like a man who had run somewhere. I was going to pay it back the second the shop turned the corner. It's a bridge. It's just a bridge loan. The title only had to read clean so the underwriter wouldn't. Holly, you have to sign the shop. If the title reads clean, they don't go pulling on the rest of it, please. You have to do this. And there it was, the whole of it, finally, said out into the room by the one person whose mouth could damn it, in front of the 2 people who had spent my entire life promising me he was the one who would always land on his feet. He had not needed my name on that workshop because the workshop was worth anything. He had needed it because one clean little signature from the quiet sister might keep a loan officer from tugging the single thread that took the rest of it apart. I had been the last unswept corner he was trying to fold out of sight before somebody turned the paper over and read the back. Something in my chest settled and went level, the way the final figure drops into a column and the line ruled under it is only a line. I picked the certified trust deed up off the table, the one with my own name set into the county's ink at the bottom, and I slid it back into my folder, and I closed the folder over it. I'm not signing the shop, I said. I'm not signing anything today. The shop is mine. This house came to me the day it stopped being theirs to live in, and that day already came and went 8 months ago. I looked at my brother, and the thing I had braced all week to feel did not arrive. I've been making your numbers come out even since I was 9 years old. I didn't take one thing from you, Trevor. I just stopped holding it up. I picked the tin back up off the table. I left the checks lying where they had fallen, because they were only copies of a truth the county already kept under glass, and the originals had already done the work they were saved to do. Howard stayed, because somebody had to walk my parents through what was coming, and Howard is the kind of man who stays in the room for that part. I let myself out the front door of the house on Maple Grove, and I did not turn around to look at it. The gold leaves were coming down across the lawn. It is a very pretty house. It has always been a very pretty house. It was just never once the thing they thought their hands were closed around. What came after came in offices, the way the real things always do. Howard filed at the courthouse 2 doors down from the recorder where Brenda had pointed me at the public terminal like it was the most ordinary Tuesday in the world, and inside the week, a new instrument was stamped against Maple Grove, a notice that the title stood in question, a hold, the kind they print in red so that nobody can buy the place or borrow another dollar against it until a judge has read every page Walt left behind him. A copy went to the bank 2 counties over, because the bank always gets its copy, and a bank that learns its $310,000 is leaning on a house its borrower never owned, does not sit on its hands and wait. They called the note. The custom truck shop 2 towns over had its quiet morning of a chain through the door handles not long behind that. And in a glass office down in Lancaster, at the title company whose name Walt had copied into his ledger in 1994, a woman pulled the Maple Grove file to close a sale that was never going to close now, and she stapled a single printed sheet to the front of the folder, a flag, so that the next family who ever walked in wanting that pretty house on that Gold Street would have somebody read them the line about the trust before they signed their name, and not 8 months after. I did not arrange that. I only set the books down on the table. Somewhere a stranger I will never meet is not going to be handed a key to a thing that already belonged to someone else. I went back to Spring Street. I swept the floor and I patched the back wall I had torn the truth out of, and I oiled the lathe that Walt loved more than he loved most people. And most evenings now I do my client's books out there at his bench under that one bulb. My name on the door he built with his own hands, the sawdust working its way into my sleeves while I foot the columns. The last ledger sits closed at my elbow, where I can lay a hand flat on it. Through the shop window, a man in a red vest pushed a for sale sign into the lawn on Maple Grove. I turned back to the bench and opened my own book to a clean page.